I'm Gerard Nadeau. I am a professor of architecture at the Hammond School of Architecture in Drury University. And about 3 years ago, through a kind of series of circumstances, I had an idea that became Art of Space. And this presentation will be, some of you here are familiar kind of with the arc of our work, others are not. I'm basically going to present some ideas that are central to what we do, accompanied by photographs for the most part. These photographs are projects of ours. But I do want to start with a thank you, not only to everyone who's here now, but to the volunteers who are involved in our projects, but also a few notable others. An effort the scale of the grotto that you've seen out there requires a high degree of generosity and cooperation, okay, which is central to what we do as a group of volunteers. So speaking for Art of Space, I'd like to thank the Springfield Art Museum, okay, but also the Springfield Department of Public Works, okay, which is also a key part of what we do. You know, of course, Public Works is very involved with the museum. I'd like to thank Rick's Pallets. Okay, so even though we purchased pallets from Rick for this installation, he provided a great deal of free services, and he also generously donated materials to us. So what we did could not have happened without him. Also, just at no cost, moving pallets from Drury here to the museum. I need to thank Drury University Facility Services. Okay, they provided a great deal of support to us, both again, you know, in terms of equipment, time, storage space. Again, we wouldn't have been able to do this kind of multi-stage project without their cooperation. Of course, the Hammond School of Architecture, who provides us with space to do what we do. The Art and Art History Department at Drury also, you know, supporting us. Drury Student Government Association, okay, because we have to get funding from somewhere. They're one source of funding, but so is the Downtown Community Improvement District. Okay, they've helped us out a lot. And then other individuals like Russ Rupert, for instance, who takes a lot of really stunning pictures. And I'd also like to add all of you to this list, because ultimately Art of Space is about bringing people together in Springfield, and also, you know, wherever people gather, they create or bring meaning to space. To this space, urban space, the spaces we create. Okay, so as kind of consistent with what Blaine has said, we invited him to work with us because of overlapping interest in the relationship of form, materials, and process to the creation of space, all of which suggest a civic potential for Blaine's work, which we were thrilled to realize with him at the museum. And we've had one other guest artist, but all of the work that we do, you know, some of it we make up, a lot of it is adopted from other works, but what we do is we kind of recognize the potential for engagement in materials and process, and we adopt those types of installation pieces to our own efforts here in Springfield. Blaine, in turn, inspired us to take on a project at a scale that truly tested our claims to an art that embodied community, okay? Both as space, but also as an event. Using the parlance of sociologist and urbanist Henri Lefebvre, the Rhizomatic Grotto is an example of the city as oeuvre, in my mind. Oeuvre being a term in French that means work, as in work of art, and that is the city of Springfield is a creative community, a city of makers in the broadest sense. So that's very important to us, okay? Lefebvre also, you know, he kind of positioned the city as oeuvre sort of as a counterforce, or something that existed before the city as a node in this sort of network of consumption, but also in a part of a network that was really geared towards capitalizing on investment, for instance, maximizing profit. So for Lefebvre, there's a kind of abstract space that contributes to that. The city of Ouvre is positioned in contrast to that. Okay, it's actually a work. It's creative. It's constructive. So the grotto embodies a concept I like to call space as event. And one of the closest analogies I can find to that is that of a barn raising, right? Many of us have a sense of what it must have meant to raise a barn. There was a time when members of the community would make the spaces required for the functioning of that community themselves as a group. So a barn nourished a community in several ways, okay? It was a utilitarian space for the most part, but we know that if a barn was large enough, you could hold things like barn dances in it, which were events for people who did not usually dance. So that's right out of an online definition. So the raising of the barn, the creation of the space was an event, okay? And we saw in that barn raising image, there's a whole community that turns out for that. But besides this utilitarian aspect, the space has a potential for events that were all about bringing people together in a very physical way, which is something that we're very interested in. Okay. If you have questions about any of these projects, you can ask me later. And so very deliberately, we offer participation in events that make form and space as an alternative to being a spectator and a consumer. At the same time, we have a very strict goal of creating forms and spaces that have the air of spectacle about them, constructions that are thrilling to the eye and monumental in scale. Okay. For instance, this is the first project we did out of packing tape. In part, this is because the work we do needs to be impressive. Okay? We volunteer time and effort into these projects, often large amounts of both, and the joy of creating something impressive helps make the effort worth our while. Another reason for creating impressive work is that we are also trying to embody qualities that represent the energy and potential of our community for constructing the good and the beautiful. Okay, so we do it for ourselves, okay, but there's also something that we're trying to represent as part of this oeuvre for the city. And this is what Henry Lefebvre had in mind when he described the city as oeuvre. You know, he's kind of constructing the good and the beautiful as a part and celebration of the community. We also are very aware that creating works like these generate ripples of energy in the community, and that these ripples added to others generate productive changes in our city that benefit everyone. Okay, a little quote from Lefebvre. In this way, art space is not simply about creating sculptures that are also spaces. All of our installations together add up to a project that is about the nature of the city itself, of urban spaces, particularly those that have not met their potential as social spaces. In this way, we suggest new ways of considering the use of space in a similar way that we question the function and purpose of art and the role of the artist and designer in his or her community. We favor empty retail spaces, for instance, like the former Skinny Improv space in the basement of the Holland building on Park Central Square, okay, which through its stages of transformation became this. A temporary space, but a transformation of an existing underutilized space nonetheless. We enjoy inaugurating former empty retail spaces that have been repurposed for the production of art, like the Drury on C Street Studio Gallery, for instance. This was the first installation that occurred there after it had been empty and available for lease for quite a number of months. We also, another example would be the Idea X Factory on South Boonville in Mill Street downtown. Okay. again, we had an inaugurating installation there called Knitting Space, which was in some ways a metaphor for kind of knitting that post-industrial area of Center City to the square in a way by kind of creating more motivation and something very visible that could bring people down from the square during Art Walk. We like to create projects on extra wide sidewalks where there isn't much else going on, including pedestrians, or, in the case of this Nest Connections project, in the middle of the street themselves, taking it to the streets, so to speak. The grounds of the Springfield Museum, for instance, are an example of a public space that has a great deal of unrealized potential until now. Okay. Similarly, we expand the notion of types of events that can occur in public space, events that contribute to our sharing of space and experience. And returning to the theme of physical experience, we are very aware and concerned, of course, with the appearance of the forms and spaces we create, because after all, like I mentioned, we want to impress. But it is important for a number of reasons to combine a powerful visual experience with a physical connection to the work, both as construction, but also as an experience after the work is installed. In this sense, the work is complete only if it is understood through touch, or the physical experience of moving through space manifested by form, so that our projects are works that you can climb or crawl or bounce or slide on. Sometimes they are spaces that you can turn or roll. Okay, they require activity, such as keeping helium-filled beach balls in the air indefinitely as a form of buoyancy. Okay, they encourage sitting or reclining, often in groups. We prefer simple means of construction as a way of keeping the process of making space as accessible as possible to a broad range of people. If you can tighten a zip tie, or unroll a spool of packing tape, or knit on a loom that is almost identical to the knitting looms used by elementary school students in Springfield, or lift one side of a wood shipping pallet, you can join us to make space in Springfield. There are other reasons besides accessibility process for choosing the materials we use in our installations. Many of us have some experience with packing tape, for instance, or shrink wrap. The Knitting Space project was done with shrink wrap, or maybe even zip ties, irrigation tubing, materials not typically associated with creating structure and space. We recognize a certain delight in the transformation of these materials that we think we understand into something unexpected and beautiful. This transformation is important to our space and is a metaphor for what we try to accomplish on a larger scale. It is difficult not to take the city around us for granted, to accept assumptions about our place in society, about forces apparently beyond our control. At many levels, our hope for artist space is that the work serves as a reminder of the possibilities within our means.